I guess we could start by talking about what's actually been happening with Antifa in the recent past, because I haven't been following it as closely as I should, and you doubtless know a huge amount more than I do. So, I mean, we've had the say Million MAGA march that happened. Someone was stabbed, and a bunch of people were arrested. Was this just Antifa terrorizing people, or what happened there?
The Million MAGA March was, I feel it was the middle of November in DC, and that was a big organized pro-Trump rally. Some reports say it's been the largest public gathering of Trump supporters, thousands and thousands of people on the Capitol. But of course, anytime now you have a conservative gathering in public, particularly in a city, you're going to have militant opposition from the far left, and the far left will include organized Antifa as well as BLM and other far left radicals. And they came out, and once the pro-Trump rally was entirely peaceful during the day, but as the sun set and people were heading back to hotels or their cars or wherever they were leaving, dispersing, then these marauding thugs that were described then went around and were looking for stragglers to assault, to rob them of their flags, and they were prepared for the violence. They were using explosive mortars, throwing it at people who were eating outside hotels, throwing projectiles, and there was so many rioters that the Metropolitan DC police were overwhelmed and obviously could not be everywhere all the time.
Right.
So unfortunately, we saw those scenes of the violence on the streets that targeted men, obviously, but also women and minors, families. But I say that this is normal in America. It's been steadily normalized since 2016, and it's accelerated this year.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that, because I recall covering this myself, go back to say 2016, 2017, and there was a genuine level of outrage. There was a genuine this is shocking. It was not something that had been normalized at the time, but now it barely even gets reported. I mean, it's just part and parcel of American political life. Does that worry you?
It's worried me for years. I mean, my family's important, and so that's where I'm normally based out of. And I've been covering Antifa for years now before it became such a popular subject in the media. And years ago, before I had the following I had now, but I was writing about the subject, particularly because to warn that Portland was the canary in the coal mine for what could happen really across the rest of America, because since the election of Trump, there's just been this not just tolerance, but encouragement from the mainstream left, I would say, for political street violence. They really believed that they were fighting fascism, but whoever they labeled as fascists were essentially anybody who opposed them politically. So eventually that became an attack on me that led to serious injuries last summer. So nobody expected that things would accelerate as quickly as they did, particularly this year after the death of George Floyd. But we had all the signs that it was building up to that.
So let's talk about how they're organized and what they believe, because I think that people kind of fool themselves into thinking they're not quite as extreme as they are. But I think, as you say, they really believe they're fighting fascism. So how do they organize? How widespread is it across the United States? And what are the sort of things they tell each other in sincerity?
So there's a lot of misconceptions about Antifa in the press, both on how conservative press covers them as well as left-wing press. One of the main misconceptions is people think that they are a single entity or a single organization. They're not. It's an ideology, it's a movement, it's also groups, networks, as well as individuals. So something analogous that people might understand that they can kind of compare it to would be like violent Islamist ideology, where people across different cells may just follow the same ideology. They may not even be formally part of IS or Al Qaeda or any of the other groups, but they will carry out attacks or try to radicalize other peoples within their community based on their adherence to the same ideology. So it's like that, I would say. What people need to know about Antifa is that the name itself is a misnomer. So Antifa is short for anti-fascist. They say that we are anti-fascists. No, I mean, that's even giving them that would just be one very small part of them. They're primarily violent anarchist communists. So they are actively working towards undoing the liberal world order, lowercase l. By that, we're talking about
constitutional democracy, free markets,
exactly.
Political representation, all of this sort of thing.
Yes.
The police in particular as what do they call it? A method of protecting private property?
Yes.
Yes, that is what the police are. That's why they're good. So the scope of what they're asking for, and you can see this in their chants, can't you? So where they say things like, was it no Trump, no wall, no USA at all, and things like that, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're very actually transparent about their radicalism. You look at their banners, you look at their chants. They will hold banners that are ripped directly from the Iranian regime, like "Death to America," burning of the symbols of the U.S. There's a lot of meaning to that. It's not just it's not just like anti-nation state, anti-borders. It's particularly anti-US. They call the US an imperialist power. So they're using a lot of language that were historically used by communist regimes to describe the West, actually. So I write about Antifa's history, the ideology in depth in my book, but to summarize briefly, it goes, the original Antifa were a paramilitary of the German Communist Party in the interwar years. So from the very beginning, it's been tied to communism. Over the decades, particularly since the 70s, and when it took root in Britain and manifested in an English language form, it was really influenced by punk subculture here. And so there's this anarchist element that was introduced, and then eventually it was exported to other English-speaking countries around the world. And I would say that for people who, what they need to know about Antifa is, if you actually want to see what their ideology looks like manifested into, like, quote-unquote state building, look to CHAZ, the former Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle.
So do you want to explain to people what happened with the CHAZ, since they may not know?
So you have listeners all over the world. This summer, for 3 weeks in Seattle, Washington, in the U.S. Pacific Northwest, which is Seattle's the largest city in that region of the country. In the days actually after the George Floyd-inspired riots that broke out at the end of May, Capitol Hill is this hippie, left-wing, progressive / gay area of Seattle. But militants there had been gathering on the streets every night and attacking a police station and tearing down the barricades that law enforcement had set up, taking over the streets. And eventually the Democrat mayor, gave instruction that the police should leave that police station. And once law enforcement abandoned it, there was no law enforcement presence in that very densely packed area of the city. And then Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone was born. They actually conceptualized themselves as a separate entity from the United States. So all the abandoned city property, like the barricades, and were moved to be their new actual borders and their checkpoints. So, they would chant against borders, but one of the first things they would establish is a hard border. And they actually had armed volunteer security, militia, essentially, standing at these checkpoints. And it was 6 blocks of the city that was taken in a really heavily dense area with high rises, apartments and flats and businesses.
So families and regular people were caught up in all of this.
Yes. Cars could no longer go in. They only allowed in like people bringing in more supplies to restock food or water inside. But this went on for 3 weeks, and I spent a week there, and it was this was the Antifa ideology in practice in a live state building that we could see. And what resulted was attempted rape, daily fights, assaults, arson, vandalism, destruction, theft, robbery, and eventually homicides.
How many people died there?
2 people were killed, including a teenager. There were 6 shootings, I believe. No, 4 shootings involving 6 victims. I might have that reversed, but there were multiple shooting victims. I believe it's 100% black victim rate. So, this was conceptualized as an anti-racist, pro-Black Lives Matter space, and all the people who died were black. All the people who shot were black. So the city eventually was forced to dismantle it because of the deaths in nightly shootings that were happening.
That is unreal. I mean, it seems like the most irresponsible thing to have done. I mean, not only does it, it seems treasonous, secessionist. I mean, I saw the signs "You are now leaving the USA" painted on their barricades, which is an unacceptable thing to have happen, full stop. But then for it to be such a dramatic and disgraceful scenario, the fact that people are being robbed, raped, shot on a daily basis to the point where people are dying, and finally the government has to step in. Why is it the wider society just accepted that?
Well, if you remember how the mayor of the city responded in the beginning, she described it as this could be a summer of love. All the media coverage of it, from Daily Beast to Vice Fox, the left-wing echo chamber, was describing it as just like a block party.
Yeah.
And they were focusing on the gardens that people were building. And I described CHAZ as like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So journalists who came there during the day, often with their security details, would see these sort of festive elements, right? Ben and Jerry's went there to give out free food. People were having barbecues, and people were walking dogs. And then at night, it was the real CHAZ, which was violence all the time. And this was a literal no-go zone for police. I know, like, people throw around the term no-go zone a lot, but this literally, like, because there were actual borders that were manned by people who were armed, police would not, as a matter of policy, go in. So if you were injured or if you needed help, you would actually have to leave the physical boundaries of the CHAZ. So the businesses there were held hostage. One of the nights that I was there, incognito, one of the CHAZ residents had tried to rob a car business, auto shop, and allegedly was trying to start a fire inside. The owner and their staff detained this person, and somehow the rumor got spread out that a black person was being held at gunpoint by a white racist. So when they announced that on a microphone over loudspeakers. So literally within an instant, probably 100 people rushed towards this business, broke down the fence because it was closed, and saved their comrade. And police were called dozens of times by this small business, and they didn't come. So that was just one example, but this was like this experience in anarchy and lawlessness, and people there, residents there and businesses owners, they're all left wing, so they're really afraid to verbally voice any discontent about what was happening because they would have been targeted.
It looks like during the Black Lives Matter protests, not just in Seattle but elsewhere, painting Black Lives Matter on your windows didn't protect you, did it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, Starbucks has given money to some of these far left causes. For example, Nike has, and these are businesses that the Antifa militants actually specifically seek out, and banks as well, the big banks, to smash up, destroy on a nightly or weekly basis.